podcast for fundraising operations professionals. Hosted by Fund Minor co-founders Chelsea Lamego and Alejandro Stevenson Duran.
Welcome to the Impact Unplugged podcast. We're your hosts, Chelsea Lamego
and Alejandro Stevenson Duran. Tune into the Impact Unplugged podcast, where we share advancement and nonprofit best practices and trends from industry experts.
Today, we have the honor of interviewing Haider Ali. Haider has led advancement teams at distinguished higher education institutions for over 20 years, specializing in performance management, strategy development, and business intelligence. He has devised comprehensive strategies for campaigns totaling over $1.25 billion and has overseen program transitions with people-first leadership and spearheaded initiatives to elevate the technology and systems within his advancement programs. He is also the founder of Resonate Group, which is a strategic consulting firm helping organizations build best-in-class advancement operations. Super excited for this conversation, Haider. Thanks again for joining us. Can't wait to chat with you and share how advancement services can really be rethought to be strategic and best serve the overall organization.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Chelsea, Alejandro, thanks for having me.
So there's this, old adage in fundraising that everybody sort of falls into the fundraising world. No one, particularly plans on working in fundraising when they're young and thinking what they want to do later in life. So I have to ask, how did you fall into advancement?
Such a good question. I think if there were 50,000 people in our industry, there'd be 50,000 different journeys into this field. Mine started when I came to university in Montreal, Quebec, in Canada. I was an international student, didn't have the largest sort of financial sort of security in terms of a 4-year plan and life after that. So I always knew I was going to have to work on campus to help pay the bills and support my dad putting me through college. And after sending out about 45 job applications, I ended up getting one interview at the Office of Advancement at McGill University, where I was going to be the database and executive assistant for the director of foundation and corporate relations. If anyone out there is confused as to what that individual would do, I was just as confused. I had no idea what this office did, what that individual did, or what my job would do. But I was exposed to this part of the institution that I had no idea existed, which is how we raise funds to improve the lives of students today and the students tomorrow at any institution. And my role there started out just doing database entry and entering gifts and updating records. But what really impacted me and grew me into the space was the fact that I was able to work on a proposal that in my first year, we would manage to close. And by my third year, a scholarship from that proposal actually was received by one of my classmates. And I saw a direct line from the impact philanthropy has on the lives of people. And I knew that was going to be my future. I didn't know what capacity or in what area I was going to focus on, but I knew I wanted to have an impact on people. Fast forward many years, I went from being a campaign strategist and a performance management associate, leading the KPI development for fundraisers, leading some of the planning for our campaign, to eventually running the BI unit at McGill. I ended up completing a period of time there over the course of the campaign where we closed $1 billion. Decided to do my MBA and wanted to see what was out there in the big bad world. A friend of mine was running an edtech startup at the time, and I knew I wanted to stay in the space. So the opportunity to work in the private sector in education was really compelling. Joined that, grew that from one of the earliest employees to over 400 clients by the time I left. We had clients all over North America, South America, in Europe. And it was really cool to see, no matter where the institution was across the planet, some of the struggles and challenges that they were facing were universal. Student success, student enrollment, student engagement, these aren't limited to any institution, organization, region, type of institution, 2-year, 4-year, private, public, it doesn't matter. Students were facing some real challenges. And so that was a really compelling way to support them while also growing myself in the private sector. I went from there into digital consulting, spent a few years there, and then had this giant university-shaped hole in my heart. I always knew I wanted to stay in higher education, and an opportunity presented itself a few years back in the capital of Canada, which is in Ottawa, to work at the University of Ottawa, which is unique in that it is one of the world's largest bilingual English and French universities. It sits on the border of two of our provinces, and it provides an education that is quite unique in our Canadian higher ed landscape. The opportunity to kind of build and raise this sleeping giant, that was really exciting. And so picked up my family, my supportive wife, and we had a 2.5-year-old at the time, decided to move to Ottawa. And 3 years in, I have to say it's been one of the best decisions we've ever made.
I love it.
That's amazing, Haider. And I've never heard the university-shaped hole in a hard. Yeah. And it's a good one, and I think it's something prevalent that the more I interact with folks in the industry, it truly is a space where even though folks can fall into advancement, it's a space that's contagious, and it's really hard to let go of that part. So I think on behalf of the advancement industry, I think we're happy you're back. But tell us a little bit more about that decision. Specifically, you have a really interesting background, even within the scope of advancement, right? You started from the director of development ops, and you shifted to advancement performance and strategy. How was that transition? What were some of your key takeaways as you transition from one role to the other?
I think you might experience this as well. Running a startup, what you realize is titles don't matter as much as the role you have to play in the moment. When I joined the University of Ottawa, we were in the midst of a campaign, but coming into a really challenging period of COVID. The institution was struggling on figuring out how best to pivot into a digital first environment, into a post-COVID area. And most of my focus was around how do we transition our campaign from this $400 million campaign that we had launched a few years back to keep it current with where we're going and what this new digital first era looks like with a new generation of students and alumni. And so the early part of my role really focused on the operations part of that title, building out the cases for support, building out the campaign cabinet and the communications protocols, building out the launch plan for turning our $400 million campaign into a stretch $500 million goal. We did all of that in my first year. And what I realized was that was the challenge of our time in that moment. And once we launched the campaign, we managed to have people coming back to campus after COVID. What happened is the organization changed and grew. And while titles don't really change as quickly sometimes as the organization does, the work you have to do does. My mentality, having, I think, worked in a startup and just throughout my life is around solving problems. So I really never looked at my annual performance or my job description to find my work. I found my work in what are the problems in front of us today that we need to solve, and then building teams to be able to help solve those problems. So after we launched the campaign, the transition moved quickly towards HR. We saw staff were struggling with a return to campus after having changed their lives during COVID. In some cases, they had partners that were now no longer there, or they had moved, or they had childcare or family care needs. And so there was a large amount of turnover. In fact, we were losing almost up to 40% of our staff. It includes fundraisers and non-fundraisers alike. And so the problem in front of us was, how do we build a coherent people strategy that includes acquisition, retention, and development of talent, and staff back up so that we can close out our $500 million campaign. And so I worked with teams. I was sitting, I would say, on hiring committees at least 3 days a week, doing interviews, trying to find people. I was scouring LinkedIn like a recruiting stalker, trying to find the best talent that we could find that we could bring into the institution.
Yeah.
And I think the idea was to just turn our attention towards solving a problem at the strategic level, rather than figuring out individual solutions every single time, to develop a strategic approach. So the best example I can give of that is if you've seen the movie Moneyball, we actually didn't, being in a market like Ottawa, we don't attract people in large cities like Toronto, New York, California, in San Francisco. So for us, how we attract talent into a small market is critical. We can't find people perhaps that are at the peak of their career. But what we can do is we can develop talent. And so we found a strategy around hiring young superstars that we could forge a career path for them at the University of Ottawa. And so once you put that strategy into place, the operations sort of take care of itself. It orients everything you do around a concerted strategy. So we did that with our HR and our people strategy. And then I would say in this last, as we move towards advancement performance and strategy, this last iteration of my current role, we've launched our campaign now. We've got our staff in place. Now it's about optimization. How do we give people the right tools, resources, space, environment, culture, to be able to be as successful as possible? And so my focus now is on building the right high performance culture, whether that's through training, whether that's through new initiatives, resourcing, KPIs, whatever, everything we do kind of flows through my office in that regard. And that's what my role is today. I can't tell you what I'm going to be doing next year, but I do know I'm going to be identifying some big problems and trying to lead teams to solve those.
Amazing, Haider. Appreciate that. And whenever you mention Moneyball reference, I'm all for it. Big fan of that movie, and I like that you're applying some of those learnings and strategic mindset for your day-to-day role. I imagine also that your time in the private sector and working in a tech startup also helped you change, a little bit of the way that you tackle problems and really look for solutions or metrics to define success. Do you have anything to say to that? How your experience in the private sector really is shaping the way you work on a day-to-day basis now?
Oh my goodness. I think it was the most formative growth experience of my entire life. I probably learned more in certain weeks than I did during the entire MBA program that took years. Yeah. Now, don't get me wrong, as an MBA, and I know, Chelsea, you're an MBA as well, learning the frameworks, learning the critical thinking, the ability to break down situations is really important. But I think what I learned most importantly in the startup environment was one, focus on identifying a big problem or big challenge and being able to focus all your organization's resources around that, because you often don't have the time and resources to try and do everything. So you identify what's going to move the needle on our business, what's going to move the needle for this quarter or this year, and orienting your team towards that. In universities, in large organizations, everyone tries to take one bite out of every single problem, as opposed to getting the 100 bites taken out of one problem. So I think that was one. And I would say the biggest other factor was it just exposed me to failure in a way that I had never been exposed before. The ability to try, experiment, fail, learn, try, experiment, fail, learn again and again on repeat till you figure it out. That was amazing. When I was at Ready Education, we had never done a webinar before. This was in the early heydays before webinars and podcasts were so ubiquitous. Mm-hmm. At the time when I launched the first webinar at Ready Education, we had no idea what it was going to be about. We had no idea how to conduct one, what the software was going to be like. It was kind of figuring it out from scratch. And when I left the organization, we had over 1,500 people attending our webinars on a monthly basis.
Oh, wow.
And these are industry experts. These are people that were just joining for really good content. And I always think back to that now when I'm here at the University of Ottawa. And sometimes we look at these things and think, how will we solve this? Sounds like a 5-year problem, And I just tell people, I'm like, listen, let's figure out the fundamentals. What are we trying to solve for? And let's take it one step at a time. Don't try and think of the end state. Think about what you need to do next and next and next. And the end state will take care of itself. So just that mentality of trying, failing, learning, and then trying again, that was invaluable.
Awesome.
Love that. So Haider, I really love the notion of orienting your operation around strategy and focusing on the big challenges at hand. And it was an article that you published recently called "The Death of Advancement Services" that caught my attention and is actually how we ended up meeting and chatting. And in your article, you suggest a new iteration of advancement services that really positions advancement services as a strategic partner. You propose restructuring teams and reorienting teams. Would love for you to share a little bit about that article and your thoughts there, and tell us about it.
So the title obviously was one that that brought a lot of attention, I think, just by the name. The reality is, in order to think of what you have to be next, you almost have to give up what you were before. The things that got us here are not the things that are going to take us to the next level. I liken it more to, a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. The caterpillar is no more. It's the death of the caterpillar, but it's the birth of a butterfly. And maybe the appropriate title should have been "The Birth of Advanced Strategic Advancement Services." But I think what I was getting at, and what I think is most important, is advancement services has always been a fundamental part of most fundraising shops. But it's seen as, and has often been, an implementation partner of the strategy rather than a strategic partner developing the strategy. So in a lot of cases, we see the services being offered, whether it's prospect research, data entry, BI, analytics, reporting. A lot of those things are done in service of a strategy already defined, rather than sitting at the table and letting things like AI technology, optimization, performance management drive some of the strategic pillars of the organization. So one of the best examples I can give is thinking about what we do in prospect research. So prospect research is one of those things that exists in almost every advancement services shop. And most of the people that get into prospect research as a gross generalization love what they do. They love doing the research part. They love getting into the details and finding those hidden gems in the database and finding the right contextual information that's going to make a meeting really powerful, or unearthing a new potential donor. And some of them might really enjoy that and want to continue doing that. But there are people in prospect research circles that want to think about, how do we build a strategy around the types of people we want to find, but also how do we build a strategy about how we go about engaging them as a group, perhaps, or as a cohort. There might be people that are interested in how we build a strategy that brings the entire continuum from engagement to fundraising to stewardship together for an individual based on their personal characteristics. And that information is so valuable, and it's unique to prospect research in terms of where the information is housed. But if they're only seen as the people that raise the name out of the database, and they're not sitting at the table when the stewardship lead or the engagement lead or the fundraising lead is sitting there having those conversations, they're not going to be able to provide that. And for me, what I've seen is the more we can bring people to start thinking at the system level or a strategic level, the more value it adds to the organization. The operations will always be there. The death of advancement services does not mean the death of our operational capabilities, but it does mean thinking about our operations in service of a strategy. And that's kind of where I approached it from. I think we'll probably end up talking about it a little bit, but based on the maturity of the organization and based on the characteristics of the organization, you can mature in different ways. What I outlined in the article are 3 different directions that advancement services can mature towards, whether that's maturing in a performance-oriented direction, in a growth-oriented direction, or even in an operational direction, which I think has a huge future through implications with technology, AI, and optimization in that regard. So my goal is for advancement services to be the architects of their own future, rather than be subject to the strategy and the development of the organization determining their future.
Or doing what you've always done before as well. Definitely don't want to do that.
What got us here will not get us to the next stage, right? I especially think about this for smaller shops. If you are one advancement services professional servicing 10 people, the next 10 hires are not going to be advancement services professionals. They're going to be 10 more fundraisers. How are you going to scale your operations to now support 20 people or 25 or 30 or 50 people when you only get one more resource? You have to think about systems level change then, not operational change.
Absolutely. So well said.
Haider, so one of the things that you obviously get yourself crystal clear, and that's become evident with some of the pieces that you've written, especially that one that we just talked about, which definitely you have a knack for titles. It's eye catching. The big question in advancement and making sure advancement professionals themselves understand what is their role in the overall mission of organizations. So in the case of higher ed, what is the role of advancement not only for in the today but in the tomorrow, which is that focus. Something that you get yourself again very 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 firmly. But can you tell our listeners, what are some good ways for advancement professionals to express that same role in the overall organization for the other different divisions and the other different organizations or sub-organizations within within any entity?
That's such a interesting question to try and answer, because I think it has such a profound personal meaning for myself. But I'm hoping there are people out there that align with the way I think. But I would be very interested to hear other interpretations as well, because I think this is one of those things that you have to align with your own sense of values and self. For me, I've always seen advancement as integral to the institution. I'll tell you why. I had someone tell me a while back, it's not what advancement does, but rather what would be missing if advancement was not there. And I think back to that kid that was sitting next to me in my economics class that got a scholarship, that was able to stay in her program and graduate and go on to be a fantastic member of society because she was able to get that scholarship. If she hadn't gotten that scholarship, she likely would not have been able to continue and would have been on a very different path. So it's not to say that university wouldn't exist without advancement. Far from it. There's lots of schools that don't have advancement offices. But what advancement brings to the table is unique within the institution and is irreplaceable for the people that it impacts. For me, that notion is deeply personal. As I've gone through my career, what I've realized, having worked with other parts of the institution, and I worked really closely with student affairs when I was at Ready Education. I've worked with provosts and academic affairs at McGill and here at U Ottawa. Mm-hmm. And they are so focused on the core aspects of the institution in terms of research, academia, teaching, and learning. And while those are obviously critical, advancement is one of the only functions, if not the only unit within the university, that solely thinks about the future of the university. Mm-hmm. Advancement is the philanthropic arm of the institution that extends into the community, that extends the growth of the endowment, that supports the future sustainability of an institution, that connects alumni back to the current students and to enrollment management, that enables a cycle of future growth for the institution. And if advancement operates within that mindset of we are the custodians of the future of the institution, I think it gives us a tremendous purpose to align our work around. I think one of the challenges universities have had over the last few years is really trying to become more effective in its operations, just like the private sector has in terms of moving towards data-rich solutions and more customer-focused thinking. If you think of a student in the life cycle of a customer, enrollment management would have that student as core to their work for 2 years before they come to university and high school. As a student, the institution has them for 4 years as an active student on average in the bachelor's program. And for the rest of the life of that quote unquote customer, it is advancement's responsibility to maintain that relationship as an alumni. And you think about over the course of a 70-year engagement, 6 years are spent with other units and 70 years are spent on average with advancement. So it gives a very clear indication as to how advancement can add value to the institution when we manage the long-term relationship of every single person that has come through this institution.
Amazing.
Love that. And so Haider, and here I'm stealing some of the terms you just used in advancement professionals being the custodians of the future of each organization is a really interesting thought and surprisingly actionable, I believe, once folks have that mindset. So in looking in the future, what advice do you have for advancement teams, whether big or small, to have this mindset? And what are some actionable low-hanging fruits that you think are or items that any organization should consider?
I think actionable and low-hanging fruit together sometimes it's like the holy grail if you can find those things. I will say for me, and something we've been able to focus on first and foremost is just mapping your workflow, mapping the experience for the different components of your operation. So I'll give 3 examples. You have the new donor experience. Just live the life of someone who graduated, gets an email from their institution, goes online and makes a donation, and then receives a thank you letter. Just that little experience, all the components that are baked into that, just map it. Just figure out who's implicated, what's happening, what does that experience look like? That's one. Another experience might be you're an active donor and you receive a thank you for your donation and an opportunity to increase your impact at the institution. Just map that experience. What does it look like? How are we communicating? What is the experience that person goes through? And the last one I'll point to is just the new alumni experience. The day you become an alumni, what is that experience like? The moment you cross that threshold, because I can tell you as an alum, as soon as you step onto campus as an alumni, it gives you a different kind of feeling. The sense of belonging goes from I live here to I used to live here. And that's a profound shift. So how we engage that constituency is really important. So the reason I say it's low-hanging fruit is because all those 3 things you're already doing. No matter your CRM, no matter the complexity of your system, no matter your tech stack, you're doing those 3 things. You're incoming new alumni, you get first-time donors, and you're renewing donors. Just about every fundraising operation does that, within a university context at least. If you map those, I guarantee, and I'm happy for anyone to come back at me if they don't find it, but if you map those, you as an organization will identify points in that experience that you can make better. And the only thing I will say, making better might be, hey, let's change the copy on the form. Let's rewrite the email. Just these small marginal effects. Those are low-hanging fruits. But the act of mapping the experience will actually bring everyone together. Will actually bring the teams together to understand, hey, we're all trying to make this the best donor experience possible. As opposed to, I'm trying to make the best form, and I'm trying to make the best email, and I'm trying to make the best outreach. Everyone's trying to make this combined best donor experience. So sitting down together and mapping that, if you don't find ways to improve it, then please come talk to me because I want to copy what you're doing. because just about every organization and every workflow I've ever seen has areas of improvement. And so that's what I would suggest.
I love it, and I think the mapping of these different experiences, as you put it, or personas, is an interesting one because you also are able to understand the volume of each of these experiences or personas, right? And that might help you understand what is the delta or the ROI on these small changes that you mentioned. So if you have something like, hey, a thank you letter being edited, one or two sentences might not seem like a big deal. But if these one or two sentences, the scale of it means, thousands of donors and thousands of interactions are 1% different. That 1% really maps to a very non-trivial amount of new fundraising revenue and new potential impact. So I love that idea in separating it into personas or experiences, and because in that effect you will very likely have a good idea as to what's the scale of your changes. How many different donors or how many different people are you impacting by any change, by any delta?
Absolutely. And I will say I have an underlying motive as to why I led with that as well, because there's the operational value and the transactional value of doing that mapping. I'm a very people oriented sort of leader. For me, and I'll be honest here, the simple act of bringing 4 or 5 different people from different teams around the table and saying, hey, let's all agree and align that we want to give our donors the best possible experience.
Yep.
And if everybody agrees on that, we're going to look at the problem and we're going to be critical of our solution, not of our people, not of individuals, of the work. And it aligns everyone together around having a focused view towards what we're trying to solve, which is the problem, not the database or the form or the challenge or this individual or, Marco didn't send me the report in time or Susie left that email left on unread. Like, those are trivial things. We need to focus on the big problem. And so just bringing a group around the table, for me, that alignment and connection between the staff of different areas, all now saying, hey, I have a role to play in the donor experience, not just on the form or not just on the copy. I play a key role in the donor experience. That is of tremendous value, bringing people together to solve larger problems.
Love it. Now, putting things into perspective and real world samples, with the University of Ottawa finishing up a really sizable campaign. By the way, congratulations! As I know you and your team had a big pat on the back.
Thank you.
How do you plan on delivering some of those promises that you've made in terms of delivering donor experience, especially after a big campaign means a lot of different new interactions and sort of your operations being scaled. So you touched upon it a little bit in the earlier questions, but how are you planning to put some of these things in practice? And do you have any tactical thoughts for any listener who's about to scale up their operation, maybe similar to you with a big campaign that they should benefit from?
It's I appreciate those kind words, by the way. I have to say, it's been such an interesting time to be concluding a campaign. When we launched this campaign almost like 10 plus years ago, initially just in terms of the planning stage and everything, we didn't have the technology that we have today. So when we were planning for the campaign, the iPhone was still relatively new. Just think of how much we've advanced in the last decade in terms of technological capabilities. It's unreal. And what's also happened is our donor bases and our class sizes have scaled up accordingly. If we had a graduating class from the 1970s, that entire decade cohort is equivalent to 1 year's graduation cohort now. So the ways that we were engaging donors and thanking donors in 2010 will not work in 2025 because it does not scale up the same way. I can't send a fundraiser to go house to house to 65,000 houses. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we have to rethink how we thank donors and how we engage donors. And the first step to be able to do that is information. I think everyone sort of points to data and to say, oh, we got to get the data first. Data is the most important thing in the world.
Yeah.
Data's like, I liken it to kind of being in the matrix where you just have this stream of, you need information, which is data plus context. How do you contextualize and organize the data that allows you to make decisions, that allows you to determine strategy? If I take my cohort of donors, and this is what we're doing at the University of Ottawa right now, we're coming to the end of our campaign. So we're literally looking at our entire donor base and building some intelligence that will allow us to build specific strategies. What do I mean by intelligence? I mean understanding who are the people that just gave once and that's it. They made one gift. And so for them, the campaign was really about a specific initiative or a moment in time. Who are the people that contributed throughout the campaign? Small amounts, but gave throughout the campaign. Who are the people that made a gift that we never said thank you to? A huge mea culpa required. Who are the people that made the largest, most significant gifts of the campaign? Understanding those groups, the sizes of those groups, the makeup of those groups, and what we need to do, that's going to allow us to then build strategies on how we want to go out and engage them. But there's no doubt in my mind that we have to first think about who they are in their life stage, before we think about how to communicate with them. Yep. If I ask someone who's a parent of two young toddlers to come out to an evening event for a thank you, odds are it's going to be really challenging for them. Their evenings are taken up with a host of parenting stuff. So we have to be conscious of how do we engage people where they are. And so maybe for that parent, the thank you really is, hey, we're offering 10% off babysitting services for everyone who, made a gift to the campaign in this cohort. And that would be of more value for them. Or maybe we launch an alumni job portal that allows babysitters to be, to advertise their skills. But just thinking about how we can thank people in ways that are relevant to their life, not in the ways we want to thank them, but in the way they want to be thanked.
Haider, loving all of these very actionable and tactical insights you've provided, and also thanks for sharing your story and your background. We really think that falling into advancement is something that we hear very often, but every advancement story is different, and every background brings in different colors to this tremendous goal for impact and for the future. So thanks for sharing that. If people want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, listen, first off, thank you for having me here today. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you about the future of advancement services. I think you guys are doing amazing work as well. And I'm so glad to see more and more private sector innovation-oriented organizations playing a larger role, because we need that thought, leadership, and expertise in our industry. So really appreciate the work you're all doing. On my end, anyone who wants to reach out to me in my professional capacity can reach me on at haider.ali@makeresonate.ca. I'm also on LinkedIn /Haider34. That's HAIDER 34. And I'd love to chat more with anyone who has ideas, wants to contest ideas, who wants to challenge ideas, or wants to support ideas in how we can make our industry just better for the people that work in it, for the people that we impact, and the organizations we work in.
Love it. And I think a tremendous way to get the ball rolling on that is, reading and writing the pieces that, similar to the pieces that you've been writing in the articles, and having these types of conversation is really going to make us all be better as an industry. So appreciate your time. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Keep an eye out for more episodes of Impact Unplugged to hear insights from industry experts like Haider here. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. And remember, for more great content and insights, visit our website at www.fundminer.com and follow us on LinkedIn.
That's a wrap for today. Until next time, keep maximizing your impact.